Last August, Molly Martins and her father Tom were convicted unanimously by a US jury of the second-degree murder of Molly's Irish husband, Jason Corbett. 2 years after his death, Jason's family finally got justice for them and his children. And now they want to tell the truth about their brother and restore his good name after a long and very difficult fight for justice. So would you welcome tonight, please, Tracey Corbett Lynch, Wayne Corbett and Marilyn Corbett. You're so welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Tracey, I think it's important, before we talk about the awful events and the tragedy, to bring Jason alive for the purpose of our conversation, to let us relate to who he was as a brother, as a father, as a son, as a friend. Tell us a little bit about Jason.
Well, Jason was one of the most amazing people. He was kind, he was generous. His children, Jack and Sarah, were his whole world. And he just took care of people. He was interested in people. And he was just so loving. He gave the best hugs ever.
He was good at that, was he?
He was really good at that, yeah. And he was just everything to us, and we loved him.
We have to go straight into the story, and we can't go any further without mentioning Molly Martins and the fact that she came into Jason's life and everything changed. Can you tell us when she came into his life and what happened and how she came into his life?
Jason's first wife, Mags, passed away suddenly from an asthma attack in November of 2006.
Yes.
And we all gathered around, and Jason was just devastated, and we supported him as a family. But there came a time where he wanted to have a structure and a stability for Jack and Sarah, and he had to go back to work. He had responsibilities. So he decided to engage the services of an au pair. And Molly Martins was his third au pair. And she arrived in March of 2008.
She arrived on the scene from the States, obviously, and they developed a relationship that went beyond au pair and employer, I suppose. How did you feel about that?
I mean, when Molly arrived into Jason's life, it was it was the lowest ebb in his life, and he was very vulnerable. And when they started to have a relationship, he smiled again. I was happy to see him smiling again. You know, he'd been through just such devastation, and everybody around him wanted him, you know, to have some happiness and hopefulness in his life.
And she brought that to him.
She brought that to him. Yeah, she did. I was concerned because obviously of Jack and Sarah, and that Molly was living in the house and the employer-employee relationship. And Jason and I spoke about that. And in June of that year, actually, Jason decided that he needed that break with Molly, and she went back to America until August. And the plan was for her to come back and get another job and live separately, so that Jason and her could have a relationship, but not with her living in the house.
Yeah.
But it never transpired. There was always a different excuse from Molly. So from then on, she was a fixture in the house and in their lives.
And they got married, Marilyn,
yes,
as you know. And did you see a different side to Molly, either at the wedding or around that time?
Yeah, around that time, when we went over for the wedding, I suppose we heard different stories. The way she was completely someone that we just didn't know.
In what sense?
From the person who was in Ireland.
Yeah.
I suppose one conversation I was having at the wedding, a couple had remarked how Sarah looks very like her mum. And I said, oh, did you see Megs? Taking this out a photograph of her. And I said, no, her mum, Molly. But I said, Molly is not her mum. I said, Megs is. And they looked confused, and I looked confused. Then people started coming in the conversation, and I kind of drifted away. There was other incidents when we were kind of meeting the bridesmaids, just trying to get to know them and everyone be relaxed at the wedding.
Yeah.
And it transpired, she had told them that how she met Jason was that she was friends with Megs and Jason. And when Megs passed away, that Jason reached out to her to help him with the children. Now, obviously, she never met Jason or Megs before Megs passed away.
So very peculiar stories. And
Yeah, even further on,
yeah.
she had told us that she had a sister called Grace who died of leukemia. Now, as it transpired, she never had a sister called Grace.
Oh, right, okay, so...
We didn't know all this until after the Jason, and a lot of things like that after Jason passed away.
After the event,
Yeah.
okay. And they moved to the United States then, didn't they? And I think that's when you started seeing cracks appear. I suppose an important part of the story is the fact that Molly seemed to want to adopt the children.
Yes.
And Jason seemed to be in two minds about that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Wayne?
Yes. I don't think Jason was never going to allow Molly to adopt the children.
Why not, though, if they were married and in love and...
Because I just thought that there was always something in the back of his mind that he just didn't want Molly to adopt the children. I knew that for a fact.
She had told him a couple of weeks ago, prior to getting married, that she had bipolar. And that's the first Jason ever heard that she had an illness.
I think a lot had happened around the wedding.
Yeah.
And besides that, you know, obviously what we had heard and what she had said about Megs, and Jason had become aware of that after the wedding.
Yes.
So it broke the trust down between I recall talking to Jason, and it broke that trust down. They'd just gotten married.
Yes.
He'd given up his job. He'd moved everything over there, bought a house, lock, stock and barrel. And then he found out that, you know, his wife had lied about the mother of his two children, Megs Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
So the trust was broken, and at that point he said he wasn't going to allow an adoption to go ahead.
He was a bit concerned about the fact that she was, whatever, the bipolar is a separate issue, of course, because what you're describing initially sounds like a fantasist.
Yeah.
Somebody concocting these stories and making them feel real and so on.
You have to imagine, Ryan, he was just becoming aware of all of these things, you know, in a very short space of time. Had left his home and his family and friends
Massive
and all
upheaval.
the network.
Yeah. Massive.
And committed to this.
Wayne, you're Jason's twin, is that right?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So you probably have a bond, or had a bond that is a little different, that comes with being a twin, I suspect.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But sadly, and in some ways, maybe it was meant to be that you got that terrible phone call, isn't that right?
Yes,
It was the evening of, early evening, August the 2nd, 2015.
Yeah.
Who called you to say what?
Sharon Martins called me at about 6:10 in the evening. She being? Molly Martin's mother. And she just said that Molly and Jason had an argument. Molly pushed Jason hit his head, and Jason is dead. And she said, I asked, could I speak to Molly Martin? She said no. She said she's too upset, and she put on the phone.
End of phone call.
End the call.
And you then went to?
I was about 2 minutes away from the family home in Limerick, so I went down to my parents' house in Janesborough in Limerick, and it sounds probably blunt at the time, but I just went in and told my mother that Jason was killed in the States. She was sitting in the living room at the time.
It's a shocking thing to have to take in and to have to tell your mother, if your mother to have to take you. Tracey, could you kind of give us a sense of what they say happened that night?
They said a lot of things.
Sure.
The first time I spoke to any member of the family, I was calling Molly repeatedly when I had found out. I was in Saint-Jean-de-Mont in France, and Sharon Martins, Molly's mother, answered the phone, and she said that Jason had been drinking for 24 hours and that he came home and they had had an argument, and Molly pushed him and he fell and banged his head. A couple of hours later, I was driving to Charles de Gaulle to get home to my parents, and I spoke to Molly, and she said they had an argument and he fell and hit his head. We got lots of different versions of Jason falling and hitting his head. She actually said that she hit him one stage as well to me, and she wouldn't tell me with what in the conversation. And of course, Tom Martins her father had his version as well of, you know, a different story completely.
Well, he phoned 911 and he's called the emergency services to tell them what he said happened that night. And that tape of that call is common knowledge, as you know.
Yes.
And we've asked you your permission before the show to play that tonight to illustrate the immediacy of what we're dealing with, and then we're going to try and counter, or at least respond to what this message says with what you now know probably happened.
Yes.
So you're okay if we play this message now? This is Molly Martin's father calling from the scene of the crime.
Yes.
Okay. Have a listen.
Our daughter's husband, my son-in-law, got in a fight with my daughter. I intervened, and I think he's in bad shape. We need help.
Okay, what do you mean he's in bad shape? He's hurt?
He's bleeding all over, and I may have killed him. Hit him in the head.
With what?
With a baseball bat.
With a baseball bat?
Yes, ma'am. And he was choking my daughter. He said, "I'm going to kill her."
That's not easy to listen to, I suspect.
No.
Because you know that that's not what happened.
No.
What happened? What happened as you now
untrue.
know the facts?
Well, what Tom Martin's claimed was that he came up to the room and there was an argument, but there were no bruises on either of them, no mark. The blood that was on them was Jason's blood. No torn clothes, nothing at all. And what I believe happened is a different story.
Would you like to share it with us?
Well, I believe that Molly Martins planned to kill Jason, and that all the evidence pointed towards it. I was disappointed there wasn't a first-degree charge. I know that Jason had a bag packed with the kids' clothes. He was going to leave. He'd been looking up flights. That he had been drugged, and the toxicology report shows the drugs in his system.
And those drugs come from, you suspect,
They were prescribed to Molly Martins on the Friday before Jason was murdered.
You think she might have spiked his food or drink?
Absolutely, that's what I believe.
And that he was asleep?
Yeah, that he was asleep, and that he was hit in bed while he was asleep, and that Molly Martins hit him, to within an inch of his life with the brick. And I believe she went and got her father as he lay dying, and her father came up and did hit Jason with the baseball bat, and there were post-mortem hits on Jason's body afterwards, and I believe they left him to die. I believe that, they waited to call 911 when the EMT arrived. And they gave evidence that Jason's body was cold. I believe they left Jason to die before they called 911.
I think Jason was probably dead a long time before they actually called 911.
Your immediate thoughts got to be the children, Marilyn.
Yes.
And what, did you get straight over to the States?
Yes, myself, Tracey, and Jason's best friend Paul got on a flight straight over. And Tracey was on the phone constantly about the children. But when we arrived, we were stonewalled. Not a single word from any of the Martins.
No answering phones?
So, nothing. So we didn't know where Jason was. They wouldn't tell us. So through a lot of phone calls, we found out where Jason was. Subsequently, she knew then, so she moved Jason. So we couldn't find him.
From a morgue, was it?
Yes, from a funeral home.
We pleaded with them not to cremate Jason's body with the first crematorium that he was in. And she had found out that I had found out where he was due to go to and moved. But it was a very kind nurse in the hospital that actually told us where Jason's body was going to. They didn't tell us. They had, the last conversation we had with them, they told us to contact their attorneys.
So we ended up where there was two sets of attorneys actually negotiating with Molly Martins for her to sign the release paper so we could send Jason home to his parents. And she eventually agreed once we paid all expenses up to that day and for anything after that.
It was contingent on you paying up before she would...
So
I would have given her anything.